This week in the boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and we have a great show today. We're going to be talking about the myths and realities of executive compensation. And I've got two experts here that are really going to help me get through today and offer some great advice. First of all, to my immediate left is Eric Marquardt, who's the partner of Pay Governance LLC. And to his left, Ira Kay, who's the managing partner also for Pay Governance. And both of them participated with some other partners in recently producing the book, Executive Pay at the Turning Point. Very interesting read on that, and I assume this is available through what means?
You can download it on our website, and if you write to us, we will mail you a printed copy.
Yeah. But there's another book, Ira, that I wanted to start with, and that was, I know you were the author of a book that actually mirrors our title today, Myths and Realities of Executive Compensation. And why don't you let the audience in on sort of what was the motivation for that book, and then what could a reader sort of benefit from reading that, a board member?
So thanks, TK, and thanks to a Corporate Board Member for having us here today. It's very exciting to be here. Basically, the executive compensation books that we've written over the years, and this new one from Pay Governance, The Turning Point, evaluate two very competitive theories of executive compensation that really disagree, filled with a lot of mythologies. And we try to demonstrate the realities. One of the points of view is that executive compensation is filled with market failure. And that there is this issue of managerial power where the executives basically set their own pay and they've captured their boards. This theory argues that executive pay is characterized by excessive pay, no pay for performance, excessive pay for failure, and very unhappy shareholders. There are many other criticisms, but these are the key criticisms, and we go through those in both books. This is mostly mythology. Because the other theory is that it's mostly a highly efficient or a relatively efficient labor market for the executives, especially the CEO, where there's a lot of scrutiny and a lot of evaluation. To take two of the issues that we demonstrate in the book, one is that there is a significant amount of pay for performance, and we'll come back to that later when we talk about what individual companies can do to sort of make their case. So there's significant pay for performance, and most importantly, they are filled with satisfied shareholders. We are now in the third year of the Say on Pay votes that was mandated by Dodd-Frank and implemented by the SEC. And those satisfied shareholders have voted on, it's coming up to 7,000 proxies, 7,000 companies over the 3-year period, a lot of repeated companies, of course. And nearly 98% of the shareholders approved the executive compensation programs at those thousands of companies. There's only been around 150 failures out of the full 7,000 or so that have voted. We think this demonstrates that the reality is that it's a reasonably effective labor market. We wrote the book to help board members balance these issues and balance the natural tension between motivating the executive team and creating long-term shareholder value in the context of Say on Pay and these proxy advisors, especially ISS, who are highly critical of executive compensation. Nevertheless, as I said, the shareholders are approving these executive compensation programs almost completely. There is another pressure that companies need to respond to, and Eric will comment on some of this as well, is that it's what we are calling homogenization, that the Say on Pay votes in ISS are causing companies to give up the portfolio of compensation programs and portfolio of metrics and narrow in on a very small group of metrics and a small group of programs. And in the kind of environment, competitive capitalistic environment that we have, we think that's a problem, and companies need to try to get that balance right between homogenization and motivating the executive team.
Well, Eric, you bring an interesting skill set to this, in that you were on the company side as the director of executive compensation at the great company called Merck.
Mm-hmm.
And so put yourself back in that, and sort of when you look back, describe what you think the biggest challenge is for management and the board sort of to get this right. I mean, even though it's been easy on pay, or I shouldn't say easy, but at least successful. So think back, what was sort of some of the challenges that you faced when you were on the company side?
Thanks, TK. I think there's a lot of distractions, if you will, in our business, but the most important thing, and I think the thing that will help keep the kind of outcomes that we're looking for from these programs in the forefront, is by maintaining the primary focus, which is on making sure that we're doing what is right for the business. And specifically by that, I mean rewarding and reinforcing the results that are going to create shareholder value. And as Ira said, there's not a right answer for all companies in this case. You mentioned the pharmaceutical industry. You know, certainly, like many organizations, they pay attention to growth in earnings. But over the last few years, a keen interest in cost management and continuing to focus on the value of the pipeline in each of those companies. Conversely, if this were a consumer products company, there might be a very different focus on just consistent year-over-year growth in earnings and cash flow and the revenues of the business. I think that the pay governance issues that are oftentimes mentioned continue to be important, but we have to make sure that when I was referring to distractions, that we don't lose sight of the important linkage of pay and performance when we address those particular issues. For example, stock ownership standards, clawback policies, and severance benefits all address very specific risks inherent in running executive pay programs, but none of those things in and of themselves are sufficient to ensure that executives are motivated to achieve the results that we're looking for. So to answer your question in summary, it's keeping that focus on driving business results that's really the key to getting it right in this case.
And same question to you. You're in a lot of boardrooms, Ira. What do you see as the biggest challenge?
So it is extremely important to have pay for performance at virtually every publicly traded company, and frankly, private companies need to have that as well. And that should be the key focal point of the boards and management on this important issue. There are other things that they need to worry about, management succession, but on the executive compensation side, it is extremely important to have pay for performance. We believe, and we try to demonstrate in our research, that U.S. companies are extremely well run. On the average, better than in many other countries, and better than they used to be. We think this is partly, and we try to prove this, because of the highly motivational executive compensation programs that there are. They have cash incentive plans, they have stock incentive plans, they have stock options, they have shares that only pay out if certain goals are met. And this is, and basically, if in fact they don't perform well, their bonuses are low or zero, and some of their shares will certainly drop in value if the stock price goes down, and they may in fact actually not vest if the executives do not achieve the performance goals. So we've actually done research, and it's in the book, and we're doing another study this summer on demonstrating that there is highly aligned pay for performance. We looked at the S&P 500 CEOs, and we found that if you split them into the high-performing companies and the low-performing companies, that the high-performing companies have high pay, and the low-performing companies have low pay, properly measured. And we think that this is a very important finding, and it is, again, another example of the mythology that there's no pay for performance is mythological. So we think it is extremely important to demonstrate that you have pay for performance. Every company in their proxy says we pay for performance, but how do you prove that? And there are, in fact, techniques using certain methodologies that can, in fact, help you demonstrate that. You then need to have designs that facilitate pay for performance. You need to have the board making decisions that show that. So in other words, if if you miss your earnings goal, but there were a lot of reasons, you probably shouldn't pay out at target bonuses. You probably should have some kind of a haircut using the methodology. And you probably need to disclose that you pay for performance in the proxy and in the 8Ks and anything else that you do that in fact demonstrate that you pay for performance. And we think in fact this is working, and it is one of the reasons that the U.S. has come out of the recession, the 2008 financial crisis, maybe not perfectly, but so much more quickly and better than almost any other of the Western economies.
So when we look at this issue, we all know that comp committees have sort of replaced audit committees as the main committee that gets all the attention and all the focus. But when you guys sort of look and, say on pays come, people didn't like, companies didn't like the intrusion, but I think we've seen signs that that has certainly created focus. But do you when you look into your crystal balls, what do you see lying ahead for comp committees? Is it going to get worse? Has the pendulum swung as far as it can swing? Sort of give me some short answers on feelings about how you feel about that.
Well, I think first of all, TK, we can say with some confidence that it'll never again be easy to serve as a member of a compensation committee of a public company board. On the other hand, if you're looking for some solace in this, we probably will not and have not gone as far as some other countries in terms of the influence of outsiders on executive pay. You're familiar, the Swiss passed laws this year to make say-on-pay voting mandatory, and we think it appears that Germany is moving in a similar direction in Europe. And I think in the U.S., and Ira's comment on say-on-pay earlier alluded to this, is that with the strong performance of the stock market over the last 6 months, we've had a temporary reprieve on some of the pressure on executive pay, and it can be seen in the favorable say-on-pay voting results that we had in 2013. And I think through this rather slow economy that we've had, the trend in executive pay, although there's been some volatility, has not been dramatically upward for now almost 4 or 5 years. But I think committees are going to continue to experience pressure. One area that continues to be in the forefront is minimizing pay for what's called non-performance, severance pay, and continuing to manage risks. And I think generally these are positive changes for the committee. But I think one of the most significant single forces for change is if or when we have the final regulations from Dodd-Frank on the disclosure of pay for performance. There will be likely some significant change that flows from that. As we've been saying all along, I think that realizable pay and company performance represents a very outstanding standard to use in this area, and I think it has the capacity to measure pay and performance on a relative basis to see how well the boards and the comp committees are doing at executing their responsibilities. And I think for those companies who may have chosen to do this in their own method or substantially different than the regulations, they will probably have to take a good hard look at how their pay programs are being managed going forward.
Well, Ira, I don't want to run out of time here. There's a very important final question that I have for both of you, and that is, I can't have you guys on here without offering some solid advice to the comp committees there. And Ira, I'll start with you. We have a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure that we take some time. I'm anxious for you guys to pass that advice along to our viewers.
So thanks, TK. It's a great question. So if I had to say the key piece of advice that we give to boards and to committees is to focus on that balance that I mentioned earlier. There's this dynamic tension, appropriately so, between motivating the executive team and creating long-term shareholder value in this say-on-pay environment. And basically, there's this, shareholders have been empowered by this say-on-pay. It's hard to argue that that's bad. That's probably a good thing. There has been an outsourcing of the voting process to ISS because of the small ownership in any one company that typically the shareholders have. And so basically, there is a disagreement over how to measure pay for performance, what are the right metrics, and is there pay for performance? So there's some experts are disagreeing over this. So the board needs to sort of factor in all that expert advice from the outside advisors and from people like us and internal management and the CEO, and try to create that balance. They should not take their eyes off of paying for performance. They should choose the right metrics, like as Eric talked about. They should demonstrate that they are in fact paying for performance by their decisions and their design, and they should describe that fully in their CD&A. And if they do that, they will in fact get that balance right between motivating the executives and satisfying the shareholders.
Great advice. Anything to add, Eric?
Just a couple of quick comments. Executive compensation it's an interesting field in the sense that we have very few right answers. It's a field where we can and often do judge many of the answers that we develop in this area in the context of their ability to achieve this alignment of pay and performance that we've been talking about. So in terms of advice, I would say stay away from the concept du jour. Focus on doing the kinds of things that will help your companies drive results and generate shareholder returns. And I think if that remains the primary focus, the program will have at least a fighting chance of succeeding, huh?
Well, gentlemen, it's certainly a hot topic, and I really thank you for taking the time to join us today. Authors of Executive Pay at a Turning Point, available on their website at Pay Governance, and good read. So with that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show today. We'll be back again next week to take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member and committee member. And we'll see you then.
Thank you, T. Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.